Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always, and I appreciate you guys tuning in. Today is Monday, March 23rd, and we have officially hit the 10-day mark with no professional sports. Not only Major League Baseball being postponed, but all sports out there. So if you're a diehard sports fan like myself, you're starting to get a little bit of cabin fever. What I have decided to do is rewatch old sporting events, either on YouTube or through different apps. NFL app has allowed you to have a game pass for the next 30 days. NBA is giving a league pass. The MLB network recently played the World Baseball Classic, the USA winning the title. Marcus Stroman having a few great starts in there. So if you were watching that on the MLB network, I rewatched Super Bowl 52. The Philadelphia Eagles beat Tom Brady and the Patriots. I also rewatched Game 5 of the 2008 World Series. Cole Hamels and the Phillies win their second World Series championship, first since 1980, the first in my lifetime. So I've basically gone back and watched the games where my Philadelphia sports teams win their only two championships of my lifetime to pass the time. So let me know what you guys are doing out there to pass the time on your end. I also got out the PS3 from the basement, decided I wanted to play a little bit of Tiger Woods Golf 2013. I also wanted to play a little bit of Gods of War 3. So just continuing to find ways to pass the time out there. Weekends, weekdays, it doesn't much matter anymore. They're all running together as we are getting to 10 days without sports, and very much just at the beginning of, I think, a very long spring into summer here without sports, that's for sure. And that's where we'll start out today. We're going to discuss the coronavirus, the effects it's going to have on Major League Baseball. Then we're going to transition into wrapping up the NL East predictions and preview. That'll finish up the National League. We'll transition over to the American League East and then work our way back East Coast to West Coast across the American League. So next episode, we'll wrap up all of our previews. Following that, we'll give you playoff predictions, all of the above. And then on the tail end of this episode, I talk about a few players whose Hall of Fame candidacies could be affected by a shortened season, or if there is no season this summer at all. So not just service time, not just payment, but overall Hall of Fame credentials could be on the line. And then lastly, we wrap it up talking about my top 8 ballparks that are currently on the bucket list. The top 8 parks that I have yet to attend that I want to see a ball game in sooner rather than later. Some of the best ballparks in the country are not on there because I have been able to attend them. So this is the top 8 that I haven't seen yet in person. But once again, here in the first segment, we're going to jump right into the coronavirus talk. We're going to keep it very much on a broad scale, on a national scale. I want to discuss with you guys out there what exactly is going on, not even specific to Major League Baseball. We'll do that in the next segment. This is just an overall kind of status check update on what's going on here as we transition from the weekend into Monday the 23rd here. So all of these updates are as of Sunday night, as of recording this podcast. Obviously, things are going to change almost by the hour, definitely by the day here. So if you're listening to this Tuesday or Wednesday of this week, some of what I'm about to tell you could be old news. But if you're catching this on Monday while you're at home quarantined, I appreciate you guys listening, and everything will be up to date. So as of Sunday evening, President Trump says the National Guard will assist in New York, California, and the state of Washington. Those are the 3 states being most affected currently by the coronavirus, as New York and New York City continues to grow in bunches and expedite itself, which obviously you can understand. I mean, the corner store, if you think about it, the corner coffee store, if one person is infected and is not aware that they are infected, they go get a coffee. There's 50 to 100 people in that store. Those 50 people literally walk blocks to their work, so they pass however many 100 people on both sides of the street to and from. Those 100 people go to work, and then all of a sudden the entire city is connected very, very quickly. And that's obviously the problem that I think we're going to continue to see throughout the metropolitan areas, is these things are going to grow very, very quickly just due to the amount of human interaction that takes place. We saw this in Wuhan to start off over in China. Eventually they had to shut down all of Wuhan to stop the spread because all of these humans living on top of each other, there was no other options they had except for to quarantine and keep everybody inside for an extended amount of time. Speaking about staying inside, stay-at-home orders, quote-unquote stay-at-home orders. This is a new term to which I haven't seen in my lifetime, but is being implemented and used at a state level. This is a state-level term, not so much the federal level of martial law, where the government essentially takes over all local governments and you're not allowed out of your home except for emergency purposes and essential travel, things like that. Well, stay at home is as close as you can get from a state level to essentially saying you're not allowed to leave your property unless you're going for food or medicine, or if you're going to work for those life essential businesses. Essential business is another term that's being used out there. But in California, the home of GSMC, that state is currently in a stay-at-home order. The state of Connecticut as well. And then most recently on Sunday, Delaware, Ohio, Louisiana, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, and the city of Philadelphia. So the state of Pennsylvania has yet to implement these stay-at-home orders, but the city of Philadelphia has implemented that moving into Monday. And the state of Pennsylvania can't be far behind, because if the bordering states of Ohio, New Jersey, Delaware, and New York all have stay-at-home orders, it's just a matter of time until Pennsylvania follows suit to just maintain a standard so everybody can kind of squash this and quote-unquote flatten the curve sooner rather than later, because that's what we're going to need to do. And honestly, in my opinion, it's just a matter of time until this happens on a national level. Once again, we've seen this overseas in Italy. We've seen it in Spain, where they have a national shutdown. You have to stay at home. They don't allow you to go out except for groceries. And they're extending this into 60 to 90 days because, unfortunately, they didn't act fast enough. And we're in that gray area right now in America on whether or not we're still ahead far enough to be able to implement this and save our healthcare system, save a bunch of lives, and you know, have an opportunity to still not have this become worst case scenario. Because once again, if you're in New York, you don't know you have it, you're going out, you're walking across the street, it spreads very, very quickly. And if obviously every one of those person needs a hospital bed or care, we're not going to have the capacity to do it. So I think it's just a matter of time until President Trump gets involved to evoke some sort of stay-at-home order nationally, because now we're upwards of 8 different states, a couple of cities. The state of Illinois obviously has Chicago, New York City, California, LA. So very much the top 3 largest metropolitan areas. Philadelphia is either at 5 or 6, wherever you look at it. So 3 of the top 5 populated cities in America have issued stay-at-home orders. And, we'll see how that ultimately plays out. But once again, I think it's just a matter of time until ultimately that rolls out nationwide. And additionally, the market continues to crash here. Whenever you're listening to this, Monday, it's expected to go down still after Sunday night. A stimulus plan in the Senate failed once again. They were unable to pass. They need a total of 60 votes to pass, and it was 47 for and 47 against. It was because of this that the market went down the maximum 5% that it's allowed to on a Sunday night, and they're expected a continued crash as they transition into Monday. But the Democrats and Republicans can't get on the same page because the Democrats fear that the Republicans won't be hard enough on businesses and business owners to make sure that this money that they're trying to give to all Americans, or at least most Americans, actually goes into the consumers' pockets or the end users' pockets. The Democrats are worried that businesses will use this in turn to increase the pockets of the CEO or upper management and eventually won't find its way down to that worker bee or worker ant, or however you want to put it from their side. And I certainly see their point, because in years past there have been issues with government bailouts and that funding being used correctly. But either way, as Americans, with everything going on with the economy where it is, a bunch of layoffs happening in totally different industries, across the board, everybody's affected by this, and that $1,000 to $1,500 that they're working towards in this stimulus package, either over the next 3 months or once every 3 months for the next 6 to 9 months. But this is something that ultimately is going to have to be passed or implemented if they want the economy to bounce back, because everybody right now is worried about paying their bills, and the last thing on their mind is actually reinvesting in the economy and splurging with discretionary income. So if you're going to want people to travel, to use airplanes, to go back to hotels, to gather in bunches, it's going to take some financial push as well as some advances in science and the ability to contain this coronavirus as we move forward. That wraps up the first segment here. Once again, I know it was a little bit of a somber segment, a little bit more national, less focused on baseball, but that's going to change here in the second segment. We're going to talk about the coronavirus, the updates within Major League Baseball. Not a ton going on. Once again, here talking to you guys twice a week. We are very much in a wait-and-see mode in baseball, but we have a lot to discuss. I come up with a bunch of great topics to talk about here in this second segment, so stick with us once again here with the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate you guys listening in.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, everybody, to the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thanks again for joining us here on Monday, March 23rd. As most of you out there are listening, are self-quarantined, as we talked about in the first segment where we discussed the coronavirus as a whole across the news. We didn't exactly get into the baseball aspect of it, but that is what is front and center in everybody's minds now, is keeping you guys up to date on what is happening worldwide as well as here in the U.S., specifically certain states, and keeping all of you guys updated on what's going on. I felt that was certainly needed here and will probably lead off the show for the foreseeable future. But here in the second segment, we are going to transition into the effects that the coronavirus has had on Major League Baseball and will continue to have in Major League Baseball, not only this summer, but next year and possibly the year after. And we're continuing to hear about additional conversations that are being had behind closed doors between Major League Baseball, the Players Association, all the different organizations. And what is front and center at everybody's mind right now is the payment plan, of course, for both Major League players and minor league players for the 2020 season. And the most recent update we got was within the minor league baseball aspect, because they make nowhere near the amount of money that the Major League Baseball players make. So if they essentially don't get compensated, they will have trouble paying for their rent, paying their bills, and everything along those lines, unlike your Justin Verlanders across the world and people who should have money stashed away in the bank. I'm not saying everybody does. We all saw the broke 30 for 30 by ESPN, but most of them should be okay if they go a couple of months here without a paycheck, unlike those minor league baseball players that we're talking about. Major League Baseball released a statement that says minor league players will receive a uniform compensation package that will cover the period between now and the originally scheduled start of the minor league season. Quote, the MLB is taking this initial step today because of the effects of the season's postponement on minor league players and their families. MLB intends to continue working with all 30 clubs to identify additional ways to support those players as a result of the delayed 2020 season, end quote. The MLB also said players under, quote, minor league uniform player, end quote, contracts will get payment equal to the allowances that would have been paid through April 8th. And players who are non-40-man roster players who are already receiving major league allowances are not eligible for the plan. Essentially, this plan is for all minor leaguers who have not been compensated at a major league level yet. So this is a great first step. I know we've seen specific organizations and teams come out one-off and say they're going to work with their minor leagues to compensate them to make sure that nobody loses housing or there's any problems due to the postponement, because that's the biggest concern right now is the compensation for these minor league players, because again, the major leaguers, they should be okay. The next conversation that is being had is around service time. And yes, we've talked about this in episodes past, but I believe the ultimate agreement that they are going to come to is whatever amount of games that they eventually are able to play after this postponement, 80, 100, 120, whatever it may be, you have to prorate that ratio of the total amount of days into what would have been the standard, I believe it was 172 out of 186. So 186 days typically in the Major League season, however many days that breaks down to, if it is 100, somebody out there smarter than me, do that math, find out what that percentage of would be, and articulate that as if it were over 162 games and not 100 games, and just move on with the status quo of service time based on that ratio. So if you're up for 40 out of 100, whatever that math is, out of 186, multiply that, there's your number. That's the service time that ultimately you will be granted for the 2020 summer. That's really the only way to do this, is just give them that prorate over the course of a full summer. When it comes to the amount of games played, however, one theory or proposition that I haven't discussed on this podcast that is being floated around in the baseball world currently is the number of double headers that could potentially be played once baseball returns. And there's a few different theories on this that I've seen. Only on weekends will they do double headers. That obviously relates to if fans are able to attend the games, if they'll do a double header 5 times a week, if every time they play will be a double header and then a day off every third day, 3 straight days of a double header, day off, 3 straight days of a double header, day off, continue like that, as well as the format of the double header. Is it a day-night double header, 2 9-inning games? Do you play back-to-back double headers? Do you start with a 7-inning game and then go to a 9-inning game? That last option there is what I did at the collegiate level at the Division I Lehigh University. We had 6 teams in our conference, so you played the 5 other teams 4 times over the weekend to give you a total of 20 games, and then the top 4 out of 6 made the postseason. So basically you went doubleheader Saturday, doubleheader Sunday, 7-9, 7-9. And obviously that first 7-inning game goes by very quickly. A lot of your starting pitching can throw complete games. And then that's where the discussion around, well, what about the statistics during 7-inning games? Won't that throw off the entire record book for Major League Baseball? You could have pitchers throwing 25, 30 complete games and every one of them being only 7 innings. I know the standard start is now about 6 innings. So even if you go 6 and get a save in the 7th inning, that really screws with the record book. And it's for this reason that I don't think you're going to see 7-inning games. I do think you will see some doubleheaders. I do think the day-night doubleheader will be something that Major League Baseball will heavily consider. I don't think it'll be 5 or 6 times out of 7 days, but once, twice, maybe 3 times, I believe you're going to see a day-night doubleheader. And then this is the part of the next conversation that I want to have, where I talked about affecting games not only this summer, but summers thereafter. And this has to do with the medical side of the coronavirus and the effects on Major League Baseball. Because even if they do return this summer, there's obviously going to be restrictions amongst crowds. Think about it. You have 2 teams, 20, 30, let's go 30 guys on the roster, coaching staffs, medical staffs, people that need to put the game onto television. You're looking at 100, possibly 200 individuals needing to man all the different stations. So a group minimum of both teams, umpires, announcers, broadcasters, everybody working the game, you're looking at a crowd of 300 people, give or take. Maybe a few less if you cut down on non-essential personnel. But either way, that's going to be much larger than the group of 50 or 10 or 25 or whatever the limit is currently wherever you are in America. So going to be very interesting to see if they do return in July. Hey, nobody can attend the game. Well, either way, you're going to have a group of 200 to 300 people. Is that going to meet requirements for the law wherever you may be? And will they have to relocate games if this is the case? Will they have to limit personnel outside of the game? I ultimately don't know what the conversation will be around. And then if you just broadcast the game on television and don't have fans in the stands, obviously then the next layer to talk about that nobody has discussed yet, and obviously because everybody's health is at the front of their mind, but when it comes to sponsors, will the sponsors have the opportunity to opt out of their current deal, not pay as much money as their current deal? Because obviously people who are sponsoring at the game think there will be 30, 40,000 people attending, seeing their sponsorship being run on the board. This inning brought to you by XYZ company. That's the advertisement they're paying for. So will they no longer have to pay the amount that is in their contract? Will there be stipulations as to, hey, we only need to pay 50% because you're only paying half the number of games? Okay, well, that's additional revenue that Major League Baseball and the teams would be losing out on, not to mention all the ticket sales. A statistic was, in 2019, $10.7 billion of revenue came directly from ticket sales. That's 30% of all Major League Baseball revenue coming from ticket sales. So they're not going to have 30% of their revenue on top of potential sponsors not paying what their contract stipulates based on a full capacity stadium, a full played season, all of the above. So they could lose out on potentially 50% of the revenue. Is that taken entirely out of the owners' pockets? Does MLBPA get less revenue based on the amount of income coming in? And then are they working on their sponsorship clause? Do they make less as players with their sponsors because they're not wearing XYZ company gloves as many times when they're hitting? And all of these conversations are going to be had not only for this summer, but extending into next summer. If we're able to get crowds back, will it be next year when 40,000 people can gather once again? So a ton of conversations that we'll continue to have here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. We're going to keep you guys updated, all things coronavirus. But that'll wrap it up for this segment. As we continue into the next segment here, following up from our last episode, we previewed the NL West and the NL Central divisions. I gave you guys my predictions. So moving forward here in the next 2 segments, we'll wrap up the National League with the NL East, and then we'll transition over to the American League East and work our way back towards the West Coast. But thanks for listening as always, guys. Hang with us here for a brief word from one of our sponsors. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik, with the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik, and thank you for listening today, March 23rd, or whenever you're listening out there to this wonderful podcast while you're at home being quarantined. Hopefully you're getting your workouts in, getting quarantined. I saw that floating around out there on the social media. Thought I enjoyed that, to get quarantined out during this break. But in the first couple of segments, we obviously discussed the coronavirus. We talked about the effects it's having on the nation, on the globe, and then we discussed the continued conversation around Major League Baseball and some of the different stipulations that are going to have to be implemented regarding revenue, service time, all of that stuff. And we're going to continue to discuss that moving forward as more and more information becomes available to us out there. I will share it with you guys and keep you up to date on everything that's going on. But in our last episode, we previewed the NL West and the NL Central. Today, we're going to hop right into the NL East and wrap up the National League for you guys. Next episode, we'll do AL Central and AL West, and then after that, we'll do some playoff predictions for you guys. So we'll have quality conversation here over the next couple of weeks, predicting and previewing what you guys can expect once the teams return to the field here moving forward. Jumping right into the NL East, obviously going alphabetical like we did last episode as well. Starting off with the Atlanta Braves. They're coming off 2 straight NL East division championships, finished 97-65 last year. They have a little bit of turnover, not a ton to discuss going into this next season. Obviously, the loss of Josh Donaldson will be key for them to replace a lot of production at third base. Obviously, Josh signed a 1-year prove-it deal, had 30-some home runs, over 100 RBIs, right around a 900 OPS, so he performed very well and turned that into a 4-year deal with an AL Central ball club that we'll talk about next episode. So third base is an area where they'll need to replace a ton of production. Austin Riley will look to filter in and bounce back from a rough second half last year, but he's still very young, has a lot of potential. They added Marcelo Zuna out in left field. They added him from the St. Louis Cardinals. He was in the NL East with the Miami Marlins in years past, went to the Cardinals, didn't perform as well, so the Braves are hoping he'll bounce back on a 1-year prove-it deal similar to what they gave Donaldson a year ago. And then on the mound for their pitching, adding Cole Hamels and reliever Will Smith. Hamels added to an already young and talented rotation, and then Will Smith added to a bullpen that has quite a few proven pieces like Melanson and Green already back there. And then the rotation, they did lose Julio Teheran and Dallas Keuchel. So Cole Hamels replaces Keuchel on that 1-year veteran rotational piece from the left side that they lost with Keuchel signing with the White Sox. They also added King Felix Hernandez, who was looking to prove himself on a minor league deal, get another shot in the NL East, obviously after a long, proven, successful career with the Mariners out west. But on paper, the Atlanta Braves are absolutely loaded. Like I said, 2 straight NL East championships based on their offseason. They are the favorite once again to win the NL East here in 2020, unless we get a really good year from a team that we're not expecting. I do anticipate the Braves to go win their 3rd straight NL East title when this year concludes. Next up is the Miami Marlins. The Marlins last year went 57-105, losing over 100 games. However, they feel in Miami that the worst is behind them, and their rebuild is going to start to improve this year. They made quite a few moves in the offseason, adding the likes of Jonathan Villar, Jesus Aguilar, Corey Dickerson. They added Matt Joyce, Francisco Cervelli. Matt Kemp has the opportunity to make this team. They revamped their bullpen with the likes of Brandon Kinsler, which should slide into their closer role, a late inning guy for them. So offensively, they had a ton of veteran power, a ton of veteran presence, veteran at-bats, no longer giving away at-bats. This should allow them to score more runs, potentially improve their starting pitching over a year ago, because that's the one area where Miami just doesn't add up to the rest of the National League East here, and that is on the mound. They do have people coming up in the minor leagues. Sixto Sanchez, he was traded over by the Phillies in the JT Realmuto deal. He could possibly be seen this summer, but it looks like next year is the year they're targeting for Sixto to come up. And, comparisons of Pedro Martinez, having people excited down in Miami for the first time in a handful of years about the potential future of the ball club they have. Next up, we have the New York Mets. The Mets are one team that, on paper, are absolutely a playoff team. But being from Philadelphia, seeing the Mets, knowing a lot of Mets fans, they're one organization where you just go, yeah, somehow they'll screw it up because they're the New York Mets. Right now, they're obviously in win-now mode. It is playoffs or bust in New York, up in Queens. However, obviously a lot of turnover during the offseason. They tapped Carlos Beltran to be their manager to move them into this year, obviously with the investigation into the Astros, the Red Sox, and Carlos Beltran. They found that he was one of the players at fault, so the Mets had to move on from him very quickly, in which they hired Luis Rojas. I played with an individual who pitched for Luis when he was the high single-A manager in the Mets organization. He said Luis is a baseball guy. He's a player's manager. The guys will love playing for him. He is very much on his fundamentals, backing up the right bases, doing pitchers fielding practice, bunt plays, back to base running fundamentals. So the Mets should improve on the fundamentals, just the technique, overall game of baseball, because the talent they have, once again, should put them near the top of this division. The rotation of DeGrom, Syndergaard, and Stroman, the top three there, you could put those against any of the top three in baseball. And even in this division, we'll get to another team which is loaded with the top three. But they did lose Zach Wheeler to the Phillies. We'll talk about him more in just a little bit. But in the bullpen as well, they added Dylan Betances. They're counting on bounce-back years from Diaz, the closer who they got from the Mariners, who was really disappointing in his first year. They expect him to be comfortable now, be able to perform, as well as Familia. They're going to need a bounce-back year out of him. He had some injuries, some problems, didn't perform like the all-star he has in years past. So if Diaz, Familia, Betances, Lugo in the bullpen coming out after the likes of DeGrom, Syndergaard, and Stroman, that pitching staff is one of the top pitching staffs across the National League and should keep them in a bunch of games. The question then becomes, can they hit enough to win this division? And with the likes of the Rookie of the Year, Pete Alonso, people obviously are expecting another 50 home run year from him. There is the potential of the sophomore slump, which we've seen across the league. Michael Conforto out in right field, Robinson Cano at second base. Yes, he's 37 years old, but he is still a solid hitter. Not the guy he was in his prime, but can still contribute. Wilson Ramos is an above average hitter as a catcher for them. It's going to be up to this lineup in this offense. If they get anything from Yoenis Cespedes in the outfield, is he going to be injured once again? Is he going to be able to bounce back? But if these things happen, the New York Mets could certainly compete for an NL East title here, or at least a wild card position behind the Atlanta Braves. The next team is the Philadelphia Phillies. They finished last year at even 500, 81-81. Have yet to finish over that mark since 2011, and they spent over $700 million over the last 3 winters, and it has resulted in absolutely nothing for the team. General manager Matt Klentak is obviously on the hot seat. He made the move from Gabe Kapler to Joe Girardi. They moved on from the pitching coach, the hitting coach. They revamped the entire coaching staff, which they feel is probably the biggest addition for the Philadelphia Phillies this year. Joe Girardi, as as well as Zach Wheeler are the top two adds which they have to this ball club. Didi Gregorius on a 1-year deal. He should be an improvement at shortstop, but the overall problem the Phillies are going to run into, and it's something they did not address in the offseason, is the starting rotation. Yes, they added Zach Wheeler, so he will be a much better number 2 as opposed to Jake Arrieta, who they've been relying on in years past, but Arrieta is still going to be their number 3. He's coming off back-to-back years with injuries. You can expect an ERA over 4 for Arrieta, not top-end rotation stuff. Then you have Zach Eflin, who had an up-and-down 2019. He performed better when he was throwing sinker balls down in the zone as opposed to 4 seams up in the zone, which is what the coaching staff was preaching in years past. But the likes of Nola, Wheeler, and Arrieta are not enough to compete with who we just said, DeGrom, Syndergaard, Stroman, or even this next team with Strasburg, Scherzer, and Corbin. Philly and their pitching staff did nowhere near enough to improve this year and really get over that hump. The last team wrapping up the division is the World Series champions Washington Nationals. Obviously, last year they came out of nowhere from June 1st on, tied with the Astros as the winningest team in baseball, and they pretty much decided to run it back for this year. Bring everybody back. The only loss, and obviously a huge loss, is Anthony Rendon, who signed a key deal with the LA Angels. He'll be out there for the better part of the next decade. They were unable to replace him with any free agents at third base. But once again, this starting rotation of Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg, and Patrick Corbin, rounding out with Anibal Sanchez, is something that, again, is the top 3 in all of baseball. Them, the Mets, the Astros, a few other teams you could argue in there. But this rotation, Scherzer, Strasburg, Corbin, in the postseason was obviously the reason that this team went on the run that they did. Now, they did log a ton of innings last year into October, which this delay or this postponement, I think, will benefit the Nationals more than just about anybody because it will give Strasburg and Scherzer additional time to recuperate and get back healthy. Scherzer was going through a bit of tightness early on in this spring training. He missed a couple of starts. Strasburg, being the World Series MVP, obviously put the most stress on his arm that he has had over the course of his career. He did parlay that into a $245 million deal, so no problem there. But the offensive side is where I think their ultimate hurdle is. They have Juan Soto in left field. Yes, he's a stud. He should continue to hit. Howie Kendrick, Kurt Suzuki, Asdrubal Cabrera. They do have professional baseball players and professional hitters in their lineup and are really going to count on the starting staff to get them over the hump to win the NL East and make the playoffs once again. With all of that being discussed, my final standings, my predictions for the NL East this year, I have the Atlanta Braves winning the NL East once again for the 3rd straight year in a row. It's now their turn to get over the hump to see if they can advance beyond the divisional round for the first time. Next up, I have the New York Mets, a surprise 2nd place finish. I think their offense finally comes around. That pitching staff stays healthy in a condensed season, and they'll make a run, finish 2nd. 3rd, I have the Washington Nationals. That pitching staff wins them enough games to be in the playoff hunt once again. I don't know. They're on the bubble if their offense will be enough. And rounding out the NL East, I have the Phillies finishing 4th. I don't think the Phillies did enough this offseason to move up in this division. Yes, Joe Girardi was a fantastic add, but I don't think he'll be enough for him. And then rounding out the division, the Marlins. They'll be improved over last year, but not enough to get out of the basement of this division. That wraps up the NL East talk here in the 3rd segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my predictions and my thoughts on the NL East. Next segment, we'll jump over to the American League East, where there's a ton to talk about in regards to the teams, the movement, the offseason over there. That's going to be a quality conversation. So hang with us here for just a second, where we're going to come back talking American League East here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll talk to you guys in just a sec.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. In the previous segment, we talked about the National League East. I gave you my predictions on where I think all teams are going to finish, how many different playoff teams we'll have coming out of that division, and the pitching in the NL East is going to be very impressive to watch, and that should be a very competitive division whenever baseball comes back this summer out there. But transitioning into this segment here, where we're going to talk about the American League East, a ton to discuss across this division, and let's jump right into it. First off, with the Baltimore Orioles. Baltimore finished last year at 54-108, the worst team in baseball. And it's going to be another long summer in Baltimore because they moved on. They traded Jonathan Villar and Dylan Bundy, their top pitcher and arguably their top hitting player from a year ago. They are now into year 2 of their full rebuild and rebrand. Year 1 was very much an evaluation year, kind of figuring out what they have in-house, ultimately where they need to go, what they need to change. And now into year 2, it'll be implementation into a new culture, new different scouting strategies, basically up and down the entire organization. They're changing the outlook and the viewpoint on what they're valuing in prospects as well as people on the big league roster. And because of this, we should see a lot of the kids make their debuts this summer. Once again, I'm not exactly sure on when, depending on service time, how the Orioles are going to work around that hurdle. But Ryan Mountcastle, he's the first baseman that should finally make his way to the bigs. This should allow Baltimore to move on from Chris Davis and that monstrous contract, which goes down as one of the worst in the history of Major League Baseball. That has finally passed the Ryan Howard contract in my eyes that he was given after tearing his Achilles for those additional 5 years in Philadelphia. Well, Chris Davis has overtaken Ryan Howard as probably the most hated contract by his local fan base. And this year, once again, should finally be the end of the run for Chris Davis as Ryan Mountcastle will take over at first base. Austin Hayes, another prospect, should make his way, should get a shot in center field at some point this summer. He's been impressive over the course of his time in the minor leagues. And as you continue down the list, I don't have enough time to discuss them all here with you guys, but almost 10 of the top 30 prospects within the Orioles organization based on Baseball America should get a shot at some point this summer to make their big league debut, to get a chance to improve or impress new management and make a case that they should stay moving forward. So if you're in Baltimore, get excited about finally seeing the kids, finally turning the page and taking that next step towards the rebuild and rebrand that the Orioles are going through. Next up, we have the Boston Red Sox. Oh man, Boston. Oh, the mighty have fallen. 2 years removed from a World Series title, 84-78, disappointing finish last year. They replaced GM Dave Dombrowski during the end of last year in September, moved on from him. They hired Chaim Bloom from the Rays organization to be the chief baseball officer. That's an excellent pickup. Honestly, I wanted the Phillies to hire Chaim Bloom and move on from Matt Klentak. He's a UPenn guy here in Philadelphia. A fantastic home run pickup for them. One of Chaim Bloom's first moves, obviously, was to trade Mookie Betts and David Price due to the financial situation that Dombrowski put them in before he left. They had to move on from Alex Cora due to his relationship with the Astros and his role in the sign-stealing scandal. Ron Roenick replaces him as manager of this team. And then just as recent as this past week, we found out that Chris Sale is unfortunately going to have Tommy John surgery and miss the entirety of the 2020 season. So that certainly puts them back and puts a lot more pressure on Nathan Eovaldi, Eduardo Rodriguez, and the other likes in this rotation, which I don't think will hold up against the offenses that they're going to have to face in the American League East all summer. So the Red Sox, I think, continue the downswing here over the next year or two before we see them bounce back and become the Red Sox that we have come to know here over the past 10 years, where they are one of the favorites going into the season almost every year. Next, we have the New York Yankees. The Yankees coming off an ALCS defeat by the hands of the Houston Astros. That's twice in the last 3 years that they've made it that far and lost. Last year, going 103-59. Very, very impressive. Obviously, them, Houston, and LA were the 3 teams to win 100 games last year. And they added the quote-unquote great white whale free agent this offseason in Garrett Cole. They signed Garrett Cole to a 9-year, $324 million deal. Obviously looking at him as the piece to take them over the top. Ownership and management in New York have made, their intentions clear that multiple championships need to be won over the course of this deal. Not just one, but multiple. And even more pressure will be put on Garrett Cole due to the loss of Luis Severino, who's going to have Tommy John surgery. Now, it's not all going to fall on Garrett Cole. Obviously, the likes of Tanaka, J.A. Happ, Paxton are going to have to step up and perform more so in the rotation. But those 4 guys right there are as deep as it gets for your front 4. And the 3 of Paxton, Tanaka, and Cole, again, can be placed against any of those top 3 that we've discussed over time. The bullpen continues to be loaded. Octavio, Britton, Chapman, it's loaded on the back end. So you get those starters going 6-7 innings, go to Britton, Octavio, and Chapman, and it's lights out in New York. Obviously, the power on offense is unmatched across the league. The health is a big concern. We talked about on the last episode how they think everybody will now be back and available once Major League Baseball returns. Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, Sanchez, the big 3, which should be back and healthy whenever the year comes back. And this is the best team in baseball, arguably. They won 100 games with the Astros and Dodgers, and them along with the Dodgers considerably got themselves better in the offseason. So the Yankees come in as not only the American League East favorite, but also the favorite to win the entire American League this year and finally reach the World Series. The Tampa Bay Rays, however, are going to be the one team that could possibly take this division outside of the Yankees. Last year finishing 96-66, very impressive. No longer going to be sneaking up on anybody. Made the playoffs for the first time in 5 years last year. Looking to take once again that next step. Their bullpen had the best ERA in baseball. Very impressive to watch them. They didn't make a ton of moves in the offseason, so very much counting on the development, the improvement of their own players, the rotation of Morton, Snell, and Glasnow, a good/great top 3 that should win them a ton of games this summer. It's going to come down to whether or not the offense can perform at a high enough level to compete in an offensive happy division of the American League East. But either way, we know they're going to be competing for a playoff spot. So now I'm going to need you out there, the fans of Tampa, to actually show up to these games. I can't have empty stands during playoff games or during September games. Whenever this year comes back, it's going to be an absolute sprint to the finish line. So I'm going to need the fans of Tampa to show up starting day 1. If you can get people to come out to an XFL football game, you should be able to go out to a Tampa Bay Rays game. You guys have a good squad down there. Go out and support them for however many games they play at home. No more empty stadiums in Tampa. This is a good team. Rounding out the 5 teams in the AL East, you have the Toronto Blue Jays. Last year, 67-95, not the strongest year for Toronto. However, they finally turned the page and called up their core, moving forward of Bo Bichette, Vlad Guerrero Jr., and Kevon Biggio. Yes, you've heard those last names before. Obviously, those 3 being the sons of the more known Bichette, Biggio, Guerrero family lineage. So that'll be fun to watch them come up and improve this year. From a rotational aspect, they added Ryu and Roark to add depth, to add quality to this rotation, to get professional innings out of those guys, because Toronto last year was one of the teams to use the opener as much or more than any other team out there, and this was just due to lack of quality options in the starting rotation. So they anticipate not having to use those as much with Ryu, Roark, Anderson all being added. Those will be your top 3. They don't add up, and when it comes across the division here as top of the division arms, but this overall team will be improved from last year, and should continue to get better offensively and carry them in a ton of games. But that wraps up the AL East talk. My final division standings, or my prediction here, I have the New York Yankees winning this division, being one of the best teams in all of baseball, followed up by a second place finish for the Tampa Bay Rays. I think Tampa Bay ultimately makes the postseason once again. The Toronto Blue Jays, they improve enough to jump up to third place in this division, and then it will be rounded out by the Boston Red Sox, who I think continue their fall from grace for an additional summer, maybe two here, and then the Baltimore Orioles finishing in last place as they once again get into the youth movement and look at what they have moving forward. But that wraps up the prediction segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast with your host, as always, Kevin Mahalik. When we come back, after a word from one of our sponsors here, we're going to talk about some of the Hall of Fame issues that this delay in 2020 could cause for the likes of players who are either on the bubble or eventually looking to get into the Hall of Fame. And it's a discussion I don't think a lot of people are having quite yet. So hang around with us after a word from one of our sponsors. We'll talk about Hall of Fame talk around Major League Baseball and the coronavirus. Stick with us.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back, everyone, to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. In the last couple of segments, we talked about my predictions and previews of the National League East and American League East divisions. I foresee the Atlanta Braves and New York Yankees winning those divisions once again. Same winners as last year. Not a ton of change at the top. However, a few small changes below that. Some wild card teams could be in the mix. The Mets, Nationals, as well as the Rays, Red Sox. A lot to be determined in those divisions and what I think are going to be excellent storylines to continue to follow once baseball returns. But in this segment here, we're going to be discussing the Hall of Fame and how this stoppage or lack of games could affect a few different players, both in the prime as well as in the tail end of their careers, and ultimately what could happen to their Hall of Fame cases moving forward. And the reason I bring this up is because I was thinking about, hey, when was the last time we didn't get a full season in? And it brings you back to the strike-shortened season and some of the effects that had on players at the time and their Hall of Fame cases. And one player who stands out is Fred McGriff, because Fred McGriff averaged 154 games from 88 to 93, and then again from 96 to 98. And in 94-95, he played a potential 257 out of 258 games. So he continued to play almost every game, but he was shorted almost 50-some games, or 66 games there, if I correct my math. But the standard 324 that should have been played, and only 258 were actually completed. And when you look at the end of Fred McGriff's career, he finished with 493 home runs. Everybody out there who is a baseball fan knows that 500 is almost that special mark. Now imagine in 60-some games how many home runs he hit. So if you do the math, he would have hit about 15, 16 more home runs. So if he finishes at 508 or 509, that's tied with Gary Sheffield, if it is 509, which gives him over 500. And does that improve his Hall of Fame case? I believe it would, because I know that 500 mark is a sweet spot that certain voters look at. So are there people or players who could be affected with lost time here in 2020? There's players who I think are already locks for the Hall of Fame who this won't affect, such as Albert Pujols, Miguel Cabrera, Verlander, Kershaw will get in, things like that, Max Scherzer. These guys are already getting in. It is kind of that next tier of individuals who could be affected. First off, let's start with Robinson Cano. Yes, he probably won't get enough votes because he's had a banned substance suspension. He is one of those guys that will now have the steroid or PED asterisk behind his name. But he only needs 430 hits to get 3,000 hits, which is obviously a magic number out there. And well, does that mean 2-3 more years now? It could have been 2 if he had 2 more good years. Now you're possibly looking at 3 for him to get to that special mark. So this certainly could affect Robinson Cano and his overall case to make the Hall of Fame. Next, you're looking at other hitters. Jose Altuve, he's obviously tied to the sign stealing scandal now. Will he have that asterisk? Will people look at him the same like he did? He has had 1,568 hits through his age 29 season, 24 more than Derek Jeter had at that point in his career. That 2017 AL MVP maybe doesn't weigh as much, but as his games have been declining, he's getting injured a little bit more. This may ultimately have a play when he goes for 3,000 hits. That's a long-term effect, but again, could be something you're looking at moving forward. Another gentleman is Andrew McCutchen. He's had a heck of a career. His greatness from 09 to 15 can't be untouched. 4 top 5 MVP finishes. He's been good since, but he hasn't really had that great year to close his career. And now a shortened year. He missed last year with an ACL tear. Will he bounce back? How will he bounce back? Ultimately, how will these numbers affect him coming down the stretch? And last up is Joey Votto from a hitting perspective. Joey Votto is somebody to discuss whenever he's eligible. There'll be a great debate. Modern stats say he's a fantastic hitter. He doesn't have the old-time home runs, RBIs all across the board. He only has 1,800 plus hits, 284 home runs, so he's not a home run guy. He was more of an on-base hitter, old school style of numbers. He's going to have to kind of pump into those RBIs, home runs here down the stretch. And I don't know if that's the type of hitter that Joey Votto is. And this could potentially impact his overall case. And from a pitching perspective, looking at individuals on the mound, starting out with Garrett Cole. He had 1 good year in Pittsburgh. He had 2 good years in Houston, leading to the record 9-year deal that he got. He's off to a good, not Hall of Fame start to his career. Obviously now he's finding his prime. He would need a few more years, 3 to 5 more years with the statistics that he's had the last couple. But the fact that he already turns 29 or did turn 29 in September, he'll be 30, pitching over 30. We all know that seems to be the magic number when it comes to the amount of bullets and the start of the decline. So will the fact that he is losing time in the prime of his career cost him down the stretch is again a long-term question that yet certainly can be asked. And another gentleman like that, Jacob deGrom. His Hall of Fame case is very similar to Roy Halladay's, a late bloomer, didn't come up very early. He had his first really good campaign at the age of 26. People right now, they want everybody up at 21, 22, but deGrom came into his own at 26. Now he's 32. Losing the prime of his career doesn't look great moving forward. Obviously, a 3rd Cy Young, potentially a 4th, would really add to his case. But the fact that he's getting older and, again, misses time in his career is one of those things that deGrom could ultimately hold him out of Cooperstown. Another gentleman to talk about is Zach Greinke. Zach, he's moved around. He's now with the Houston Astros after being traded at the end of last year. He's a pitcher who isn't overpowering anymore. Reminds you a little bit of Mike Messina, an athletic guy, pitches with his brain more so than his talent. Through age 35 season, that's where him and Messina, that's where Greinke is. And compared to Messina, he's right there at innings, right there at ERA plus, right there at wins respective. So a few more years. Messina pitched 4 more years after age 35, and 2 of them were very good. Can Zach Greinke mimic this in Houston over the next 4 seasons to ultimately say, hey, I'm very similar to Mike Mussina. Look at our statistics. I am indeed a Hall of Famer. And wrapping up this conversation, there's a trio of individuals. We touched on a few of them in our last preview, a couple of them with the Atlanta Braves. Felix Hernandez, Cole Hamels, along with the likes of John Lester. All of them are probably just short of Cooperstown currently. Hamels and Lester have the postseason excellence, World Series MVPs, World Series championships. Felix obviously coming off of 3 down years in Seattle. He's looking to bounce back in Atlanta, prove that he still has something in the tank. But each of them has over 2,500 innings in their career, and they have 1, 2, maybe 3 years left, depending on who you're talking about. 1 for Felix, 2 for Hamels, maybe 3 for Lester. But ultimately, coming down the stretch, if they miss time when they would have been able to perform, and their stats reflect that at the end of their career, it's going to be a tough conversation to have in getting these guys into the Hall of Fame. But that's a conversation for the future. It's a conversation I was just thinking about going, man, these guys are going to lose time. Is it going to affect their statistics? And after looking at a few individuals, I thought it was worthy of conversation with you guys here on the podcast. But that'll wrap up this segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Kevin Mahalik, talking all things baseball. The 6th and final segment we'll have, after a brief word from one of our sponsors, obviously, is our fun segment where we'll wrap up the episode. And today I'm going to give you guys the top 8 ballparks that are on my bucket list to visit. Now, I visited a ton of Major League parks, so you're probably not going to hear the standard ones you think of as the best of the best. That's what I'll discuss on next episode, giving you guys my top 5 or 7 ballparks I have been to. But today we're going to talk about the ones still on my bucket list. And if any of them out there are your hometown ballparks, let me know what to check out, what to visit, where to go, what to see. And we appreciate the interaction from you guys out there. Do so on social media, on Twitter, Facebook. Follow the GSMC Baseball Podcast, as well as share this podcast with one of your friends. I know everybody out there has a group text where they discuss fantasy baseball with their buddies or just baseball in general. Shoot a link to this podcast into that group text to let everybody know to check it out. This is where to get your baseball information. We would appreciate it if you share the word, as always. Hang with us here, a word from one of our sponsors, and then we'll wrap up this episode on the next side with the top 8 ballparks on my bucket list.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the 6th and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate you guys listening today. We've talked about a ton in the first 5 segments, discussing the coronavirus, the effects it's having on Major League Baseball, and will continue to have across not only this summer, but the following summers as well. We then previewed the NL East and the AL East. I gave you guys my predictions on who's going to win those divisions. How I believe it will be repeat champions this year once again, the Atlanta Braves and the New York Yankees, both repeating as NL and AL East champions, and other things we can look forward to when baseball finally returns. And then last segment, finally, we talked about some Hall of Fame credentials and players that could be affected by missing time across this summer and ultimately missing games and potentially missing milestones, which would help their resume to get into Cooperstown. Two of those most affected by this, I believe, are Atlanta Braves, and that is Cole Hamels and Felix Hernandez, both on the tail end of their careers, and another very solid year could have almost cemented their claim to get into Cooperstown. But now with a shortened season, I don't know if they're going to have the full statistics to add to their impressive careers and help them get over the top. Here in the final segment, we're going to talk to you guys about the top 8 ballparks on my bucket list. The top 8 parks that I have not been to that I would love to visit all across America. Now, I mentioned I have been to quite a few, so you may not hear the best of the best, but there are a ton of beautiful ballparks that will be mentioned here. Starting out at number 8 and working our way up to number 1, we're going to start with Chase Field in the Arizona Diamondbacks. Obviously, this ballpark opened in 1998, so it is now over 20 years old. But I do want to see the pool out in right field. If I'm going to go to one game out in Arizona, I'm going to get pool tickets. I want to be swimming, hanging out, checking out the bar scene out there in the pool, what's going on. That's the only thing I want to check out there. So you Arizona fans, you people out in Phoenix listening to the episode may not like the hometown stadium. I've seen certain rankings having it in the bottom third of all stadiums, but I want to check out the pool. I want to watch a game while swimming. I think that would be a lot of fun. Next up, we have Busch Stadium, home of the St. Louis Cardinals. I haven't been to St. Louis to see a ball game yet, and obviously the Cardinals being one of the more known, the more stoic fan bases, teams, organizations across Major League Baseball. I want to watch a Cardinals game in this park. It opened in 2006. It looks like they've made recent improvements to the ballpark, new entertainment features, new social spaces. They have the Budweiser Terrace up there. Want to grab some beers, 2 full-service bars, a cabana. It just sounds like a good time to watch a game, a nice, neat, clean ballpark that has some history in it. Obviously, the Cardinals having success winning World Series, being to the postseason, and checking out the Archway in St. Louis as well. Just the whole aura of the Cardinals in the park there at Busch Stadium, I think would be very enjoyable to watch a game. Next up, we have Progressive Field, home of the Cleveland Indians. Yes, they've recently revamped Progressive Field, opening up an outfield concourse, redid the suites, adding restaurants, but parts of the ballpark have been untouched since 1994. Wow, almost 26 years ago. Pretty crazy how old that gets in a hurry here. The new club space, refreshed fruit and drink menu, amenities. It seems like a lot of fun out there in Cleveland. The big wall in left field, heading out that way. The Indians have been very good in years past. Cleveland looks like a fantastic environment out there for a ball game. I think that would be a really cool place to watch a game moving forward. Next up is T-Mobile Park, home of the Seattle Mariners. New naming rights out there. Obviously wanted to call it Safeco Field, but it is T-Mobile Park. Let's see, what else have they improved out there? They've introduced several new food and beverage options. They have the, the crickets, the fried crickets or barbecued crickets that I got to try for a game. That didn't make it into my top 5 ballpark foods just because I'm not super excited about trying crickets, but ultimately got to get there, got to try those out. I hear it's a beautiful ballpark, beautiful area. So basically that one's to try out the crickets as well as see the beautiful city of Seattle. Moving on to number 4, as that was 8 through 5. Number 4 is Kauffman Stadium. Kind of a surprise here. Kauffman Stadium, home to the Kansas City Royals. It opened in 1973, got serious upgrades in 2009, so it's been 11 years since there was a huge upgrade out there. Obviously, the fountains out in the outfield, I would love to stand out there. Kansas City is known as the City of Fountains, dating back to the 1800s when public fountains were made for thirsty animals. There you go. You learn something new every day. Later, fountains were more decorative in nature. Obviously, they've kept this going out there in the outfield. I would love to walk across, chill with the fountains, watch them go off for a home run, and just what's a beautiful visual of a stadium there looking from home plate out into the outfield. I think that would be a beautiful, beautiful stadium to just walk around and check out a ball game. The top 3 here, after I wrote them down, I found out there's a little bit of a pattern. They are all West Coast parks, being from greater Philadelphia. I haven't been out to the West Coast to see a game in quite some time. I did see a game in the old Giants Stadium. We'll get to that one here in a little bit. But at third, I have Petco Park, what I think is a very underrated park out there in San Diego. I'd love to hang out down the left field line in those porches that you see. Yes, the same ones that Bartolo Colon hit his only home run into. I think that would be a fantastic place to watch a game, as well as, out in the outfield. They have what looks like the grass area. You see people out there in chairs and things like that. Let's see, it's right downtown. They say within walking distance of hotels, garages. It's very kid-friendly. That's what I talked about. The park in the park, 2.7 acres. Here, it seems like a fantastic atmosphere to catch a ball game out on the West Coast. And having never been to the city of San Diego, if I ever do make it, I'm definitely going to go to a ball game while I'm there. Number 2 is Dodger Stadium. This one, obviously, along the likes of Wrigley Field, which I have been to, and Fenway Park, which I have been to. So this is the one of the 3 that are left from the late 50s or 60s, it looks like, out in LA, Dodger Stadium. So it's something I got to check out. It's not top of the line for innovation. It's more the nostalgia that is involved with Dodger Stadium, who played there, who has played there in the past, who's there now, and just the overall LA vibe of watching a Dodgers game, knowing there's celebrities in the ballpark. It's beautiful weather. It's Dodger Stadium. There's just a ton of history that needs to be explored and talked about, and I think that would be fantastic to watch a ball game out there. So if you're from LA, hit us up on Twitter, GSMC Baseball Podcast. You'll find us on there. Let me know where I need to go for Dodger Stadium. I obviously talked about the Mexican cream corn that I want to eat in the last episode. So a 2-for-1 there. Fantastic food in Dodger Stadium. Certainly going to make a trip out to LA here to catch a game. My number 1 stadium that I want to get to on my bucket list, Oracle Park, home of the San Francisco Giants. Right there on the water, the views from the grandstand, the concourse of the bay are excellent. I've had family attend games out there. I've gotten pictures from the seats that almost look like they're a painting with the water, the boats out there on the bay. Beautiful area. You can walk all around. The history of San Francisco right there. It's a very transit-friendly ballpark. They talk about how you can get there by all different ways, whether it's boat or a bike or a train or however you want to get there. They offer fantastic food, but just the overall visual of Oracle Park, of the bay beyond the right field wall. I would love to walk around out there, catch a game in the beautiful West Coast. So 8-1, the ballparks on my bucket list to check out are Chase Field, Busch Stadium, Progressive Field, T-Mobile Park, Kauffman Stadium, Petco Park, Dodger Stadium, and Oracle Park. So if you're listening from one of those cities out there, hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Follow us, please. Subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Of course, that helps spread the word here. But let me know what I need to check out when I do eventually head to these stadiums, whether it's this summer or in the future moving forward. A lot of things I know you guys are going to be able to tell me what I need to do out there moving forward. But that wraps up this episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Once again, talking all things Major League Baseball, coronavirus, NL East, AL East division previews, Hall of Fame candidacy, and then my top 8 ballparks that I have not been to that I still want to see. It was a fantastic episode. I appreciate everybody listening out there once again. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. One last time, I'm going to ask you to remember to subscribe to the show, write a nice review. That really helps us. Rate the podcast, share it with your friends, your family, anybody who's a baseball fan out there. Let them know to check out the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. That goes a long way. I appreciate every one of you out there. Enjoy your Monday, enjoy your week in quarantine. Stay safe, stay inside, and I'll talk to you guys again this Thursday. So appreciate you listening. Thank you very much, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.